we all want to practice compassion, and yet we have no, reservoir of compassion for ourselves. And to look at our own shadow and still choose compassion for ourselves and to see it completely, that is grace.
Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Christina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life. Now is the time to ground your manifestations and release stagnant energy for the new year. Stephanie, the founder of Tangerine Sage Healing, creates a serene capsule for Usui and Holy Fire Reiki, quantum energy healing, and tarot and oracle readings for those who are seeking relief and inspiration to connect with one's most authentic self and life. Use special promo code capital JOY JOY to receive 33% off your first one-on-one session. And for more information, visit tangerinesagehealing.com or go to Tangerine Sage Healing on Instagram or TikTok. I am a longtime client and customer of Tangerine Sage Healing, and as always, can't recommend her enough, so definitely go check Stephanie out now.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 24th episode of Soror Mystica. Today, we are going to be exploring the symbol of the shadow, which is something that really comes up a lot in our explorations as diviners, as people who think deeply about the soul, psychology, and the mystical side of life. So we're excited to offer this week, but I'll share one tiny item, and then Mariana will share also an important announcement. My tiny thing is just that if you are a witchy, mystical small business and you're looking to reach an audience of people who like our podcast, like maybe you do, it would be our pleasure to have you join us as an advertiser on our show. There are a couple of different ways to become an advertiser. You can, basically have your pick of where your ad shows up in the episode. And depending on, what you'd like to share with us, you'd be able to find more customers, more reach, and just have your name kind of shared out there in the ether. So you can find all that information in our show notes as usual, but I'd like to remind you that that's available to you if you're interested.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. We are very, very excited to partner with so many great people. We've partnered with a lot of great people already. So, my birthday's in a couple days.
I wish I could be with you.
I know. We've never had birthdays together, and I think that is absolutely a horrendous thing.
It's illegal.
It is illegal. And one day we will rectify that somehow, because we'll force you to not live in the middle of the Pacific Northwest.
The middle of the edge of the world.
Yeah.
It would be so good to be together, but I have a whole bag of goodies from Italy to send to you, so I'm excited to do that.
That's very exciting, and I'm eagerly waiting. I have a thing with presents, so I get very excited for presents. It's left over from childhood. I was a very excited present person as a kid. My mom used to do great things. She used to she was very creative with how she would give us presents, and she would make a scavenger hunt around the house, and so she'd like hide notes under things, and you'd have to find it, or she'd do like hot and cold. And so I don't know. And anytime someone tells me I have a present, I get very like I'm 6 again, and I'm like, where is it? Where is it?
Good.
It's very sweet. Anyway, it's my birthday soon, which means it's Scorpio season, which means we're talking about the shadow. And I want to let people know that I will be partnering with the Jung Academy, also known as Jungian Online. Jungian Online is like the side of it that kind of like gets you paired with Jungian analysts if you are ever interested in doing analysis, which I highly recommend. Really great, fun times. But the other side of it is educational. And so that's the Jung Academy. It is just a phenomenal platform. They have so many different kinds of classes. Christina and I just took a class together with Chantel Powell, who talked about like symbols and images from the underworld, from the unconscious, and just it was so rich. And I've taken ones there on alchemy, and they just have a lot. And I will be teaching a class on tarot and shadow work in January. And so the official title of the class is, I'm probably going to get it wrong, but it's something like Tarot and Shadow, a guided exploration of self-reckoning with the cards, I think is basically the title of the class. And so it is a 3-week class in which we are going to be moving through the idea of shadow in the tarot, how we find it, how we work with it, what shadow work is, the reality of that, how to do it safely and ethically and responsibly, and well. And so we're going to be talking about how to do shadow work and really considering all the different kinds of cards, the court cards in shadow work, the major arcana in shadow work, the minor arcana in shadow work, and just the overall practice of it. So it's more hands-on than other courses I've taught. It's not as much. There's definitely lecture. It's one of my classes, so there's going to be some lecturing. I like to yell at people and give them
You like to teach people. You're teaching
a lot
people.
of information. But we're also going to be doing guided work together. So we're going to have prompts and we're going to work on it as a group. And so you really get how to do it, right? So it's not just like, here's information, go, good luck. And so that's the goal here. And I'm really, really thrilled to be doing this and partnering with the Younger Academy, because I have so much respect for that platform. So if you are interested in joining, you should go to youngeracademy.com/tarot-and-shadow. You can also go to my Instagram, where there is definitely a link to get that class. And I think that it's November, so you can still get either the early bird. You might be able to get the early bird pricing still, and which is like $30 or $40 cheaper than the like normal pricing, because the class starts in January. So go do that now. Don't miss it. And I really, really hope to see you there. But now we're going to get into the deep, dark dungeons of the psyche. I guess first we have to talk about what we're reading. Right?
Yeah, first things first, Scorpio. Let's back it up and talk about books. We're not there yet. But seriously, for anyone who is thinking about registering, you simply must, because Mariana's classes are excellent. And I'm so excited. And I'm also really proud of you, because,
Thanks.
you know, that institution is really cool, and they have great programming. So I'm so glad that you're part of it.
Thanks. It feels very cool to be like, see my name among all these like Jungians I really, really respect. And like, wow, my 23-year-old dream has like completely come to fruition. So that is very exciting for me. So I appreciate that a lot. And yeah, I'm very excited for this too. This is a brand new class for me. I obviously have thoughts about this, have had them for a long, long time, but I've never put something together quite in this way. So it'll be a very fun, project to take on and to offer how to make this real. Shadow work. We will get into it.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about shadow work. Yeah, this is a good primer probably for that class.
Yeah.
Okay, so to speak about what we're reading right now, I've been working on this book called Love in the Western World, and it is by this philosopher named Denis de Rougemont. And it is this really cool exploration of basically love in all of its forms in different mythic contexts. And so it starts with the Tristan and Isolde myth, and then it is going to kind of like go into the Greco-Roman stuff and talking about the point of mythology and the function of it, and you know, all of these really cool questions that I love to consider. So I'm very, very excited to dig into it. And
that's so cool.
I know that you would like it. It's really great.
100% would like it. Yeah, I'm still not like really in my reading brain right now, but I did recently finish Owning Your Shadow, which is by Robert Johnson. So that is a really good primer for people who might take that class or just interested in the shadow or shadow work. That's a really, really good one. And what's really interesting about that book is he has a whole third of the book is on the shadow in relationships,
Mm.
which is where we confront it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about that whenever I talk about the lover's card. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
that's where we find our shadows often. So that's a
So
good one.
yeah, let's then turn into. Sorry, I just ran right over you, but I'm like,
You
okay,
just
she's
railroaded
ready.
me.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
What is the shadow? The shadow is a psychological concept. It's an archetype. So whenever we talk about archetypes, we're talking about Jung, because Jung is the psychologist who talked about archetypes, kind of formulated how we think about them today. He did not make them up himself. This is an idea that comes out of Platonic thinking. It is super ancient. But he kind of said, well, what does this mean when we're thinking about myths and stories and the psyche and all these things? And so when we think about archetypes, a lot of times people get like, they Google, what are archetypes? What's my archetype? Blah, blah. And then we'll get like, you're the caregiver, you're the mentor, you're the campaigner, you're the whatever. These are false. They're not things. I mean, maybe they're true. Who knows? But like, they're not Jungian things. These are not established in the world of psychology. These are things made up by other people that want cute things. Remember when I got like someone reached out to me and was like, "Hey, do you want to write a book for us on archetypes?" And I was like, "Oh my god, yeah." And they
Mm-hmm.
were like, "Cool. We want you to say all of this." And they
Yeah.
basically like gave me a formula for what they wanted the book to be, and it was someone else's book that's already written essentially. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "But I don't believe any of this to be true." And they're
And it
like,
was kind of
"Oh,
like badly mapped onto like the houses of the astrology chart too, right? Weren't
yes.
there 12 of them and they like had them
Yeah.
in a wheel or something like
Yeah,
that?
and I
Yeah.
was like, "You're stealing this from another author whose book is very interesting, but now mine," and I don't agree completely. So,
Yeah.
anyway, when we talk about archetypes, we're talking about one of the biggest ones is the shadow. The shadow is an archetype because what the shadow shows us is this constellation, this pattern of human experience that is universal. That's why it's archetypal. And the shadow is one of the biggest, most universal concepts that we have. So, the shadow essentially is everything that is unintegrated into the conscious psyche. So, I've had the question before from people ask me, what's the difference between the unconscious and the shadow? And I would say that they're very similar concepts in the way that we talk about them, in that the unconscious is also what's unintegrated. But more specifically, the shadow is what is unintegrated about the personality,
Mm,
right? About who we are that we don't see. Whereas the unconscious is just kind of this enormous ocean of experience that
totally.
we can
Yep.
draw from.
I agree. Yeah.
So, with the shadow, when we're talking about shadow and talking about shadow work, which we'll get to, I'm sure, at some point in the episode, we're really talking about all that we don't see in ourselves. It is shadow because the light of consciousness, of seeing who we are, shines, and the shadow is underneath our feet or it's behind us and we
Mhm.
can't see it. And so our job, the work of analysis, the work of individuation, of self-becoming, is to see those things, to go searching for them, to recognize them, and then to bring them in if possible.
Mm.
So that's essentially the definition of the shadow that we should be working with. It is all
Mhm.
about the personality that we cannot see.
Mhm. Yeah. Well said, as usual, as always. And I think that it's interesting because the shadow is such a popular topic as we live in this
Yep.
moment of like, the sort of democratization of like spiritual work, where everyone's learning because of the internet about
Yep.
archetypes and
Mm-hmm.
shadow work as a concept is like huge, and one might argue has been totally hijacked and co-opted by so-called wellness industries to make
Mm-hmm.
people kind of feel bad about themselves,
I
right? It's
have
like
some very
another.
spicy takes.
Oh yeah, no, we both do, and it's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like that's part of the reason why this is a great conversation to have, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's so much more to the shadow than the way that it is described. And
Yeah.
um, thinking about shadow too, it's like, how do we know when we're encountering the shadow, right? That's like a question. I think that for me, to speak personally about it, it's like
Mm-hmm.
in moments of my life, especially in my like mid late 20s, when a
Mm-hmm.
lot was going on for me that was like really transformative but very intense, I was having these cyclic experiences with people in my life, relationships,
Yep.
or my
Yep.
own sort of fears, or my own sort of like, struggles bumping up against the same obstacles over and over and over again. And thank God I was friends with you, because you were kind of like, duh, this is like part of your shadow. This is part of your experience. And there's something you're not fully aware of
Yeah.
in these dynamics with whoever, you're bumping up against, or whatever part of you that's giving you such deep resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's kind of something I wanted to start with, because we can talk about the shadow and abstractions, and we can talk about
Yeah.
this idea of the unintegrated self or whatever, but it's most helpful, I think, to people to be able to know, what is a shadowy kind of moment? What does that look like? How do we
Yeah.
define that? Yeah. Hmm.
Um, I'm just thinking about how much I expose of myself because I have some good examples and what's not the worst of them. So I think that, so I used to have a friend that when I would get very anxious when something was going on in my life and I was very anxious about it, I would like reach out to them and be like, I am anxious. This is happening. That's happening. And this is when I was very young. I was like in my late teens, 18, 19 years old. And they would like kind of like freak out a little bit and be like, I don't know, like maybe let's do this or let's try that or whatever. And I would become very mean to them. Like I would be like, you're not helping me, right? And consciously, I'm thinking, I'm stressed. I need help. I need problem solving. I need something from you. You're my friend. You're supposed to be providing this to me. And I was completely unaware of how I was actually acting like in the situation. And when at some point, like they'd never confronted me. I think that they just like accepted this about me and were like, oh, it's one of her things, whatever. But when I was in analysis several years later and I started doing that thing of breaking myself down, I kind of looked at that part of myself, that part of my life, and I was so defensive about it because it was so raw for me to see that part of myself would be to shatter my idea of the good person I am.
Yep.
And so I completely could not look at it. And eventually it took like a couple of years. And then I saw that pattern and I was like, oh my God, like I did that. I was really impatient and demanding. And I treated this person who loved me, who just was incapable of really helping me the way that I needed to be helped. And I did need that. I was very, I was a very sad, like, early emo 2008 person and being like, my emotions are crazy. I don't know how to self regulate. I was not well all the time. And I needed help, and I did not get the help that I needed from this person, which they were not responsible for. But I wanted it from them because I cared for them and I trusted them and I acted badly. I just did not treat them well. And only in these situations. And then I would, pretend it never happened and just go on with my life. And thank God they did too. Because if they ever said anything to me, my shadow side would also be like, how dare you? Don't bring it up. Don't call attention to it. That is the shadow in action. It is my defense completely. The ego defends myself and saying, no, I'm right. I need help. I'm not being helped. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm depressed. I need somebody to pay attention to me. All these things are true. And at the same time, my behavior was expressing just something about myself that was also true. I'm impatient. I can be cruel if I'm really, really anxious. I can lose my sense of like groundedness and control over how I treat somebody I care about. We all have those things where we are also dark and there's terrible things to us too. And that is what shadow work is really about. And what shadow is, it is the acknowledgement of these sides of ourselves that are dark and terrible. And when we're talking about working with the shadow, we're already here. I tried to wait longer, but I'm already here. A lot of times I see people talk about shadow work and they're like, well, I did some journaling about my fears and my limiting beliefs, and my self-sabotage, and I've gotten somewhere with myself. Like I have some, understanding, and so I'm better. And I want to be like, well, congratulations, you just improved your shadow disconnection. Because
Mm,
that is all good work. That is good conscious work to do, to say, hey, I don't think I can actually do this thing. Maybe that's a limiting belief. And try to see it clearly and all of that. That's really good. But shadow work is actually looking at the ways that we are dark, looking at
mhm.
the ways that we are the thing that's scary and bad and uncomfortable and villainous, and all those things are true. And so if we continue to be like, oh, I have a limiting belief about myself, let me write this mantra 20 times of I'm worthy of everything I receive or something, and then think I'm done, you never actually examined, well, I, don't believe I can accomplish this thing because actually I think I deserve everything in life. And
Mhm,
so I fail constantly because I don't get the thing that I think I deserve, and I have to confront that. That's the
mhm,
darker shadow part. And so
mhm.
that's what we're really talking about with the shadow when, when we're thinking about it, this exists in us all and we all have to know it and see it. It's really, really, really challenging. And it
Mhm.
doesn't mean we're going to heal it all the time. It usually takes years to even recognize something, a
Yeah,
pattern or an experience. But that is what shadow is really about. Not just like, oh, I'm really scared of being in my power. That's
right,
important. That's not
right,
shadow.
right. Yeah, no, that's a great distinction. And, I think that when we talk about shadow too, it also brings up things like shame
Yes.
and, other assorted related emotions or experiences. And there is a lot of shame around the fact that we have a shadow side to us. And I think a lot of people who are so guarded and defensive, exert a lot of energy to maintain that image or that aura that they are the victim, and
Yep.
not the villain. And
Yep.
so, like, yeah, there's something about contending with the kind of monster within that can
Yes.
be, a sort of shadow element. And
Hmm.
so, like, I'll share, some ideas that I've been really, really, really drawn to the labyrinth myth.
Yeah. You've
Like,
been
for the
mentioning it.
past few months, yeah, I'm having labyrinth dreams all the time, and I'm like reading, I'm reading lots of versions of the story, and um, anyway, it's just really haunting me. And so, of course, I think one particular take, or maybe it's a Jungian take, I don't really know, but
Hmm.
the labyrinth story is that all of this drama happens basically with the gods and mortals, and there's this king Minos, who's the king of Crete, and he really needs to like secure the admiration of his people. So he says to Poseidon, send me a white bull and I'll sacrifice it to you, and I will, that'll make the population love me and show that I'm aligned with the gods. So Poseidon sends
Right.
him this beautiful white bull, and Minos is so impressed by the bull that he's like, I'm going to keep it. So he's this like greedy, awful, cruel king, and he does the wrong thing. Poseidon gets really mad at him and is like, all right, I'm going to send a curse to your family. And so your wife, who is the sorceress Pasiphae, becomes enamored of the white bull and
Yeah.
has
It's my
sex with
favorite
it.
part of the story.
Right.
Yep.
It's so, oh my God. I didn't know this detail, but she has Daedalus, who is the guy who ends up building the labyrinth. She has him because he's like a master inventor, build her like a cow
Oh
suit.
yeah, she goes into the suit so that
Yes.
it can do her right.
What? So that was a shocker when I was like, oh, I did not know. So anyway, talk about keeping things in shadow. So that happens. She births the Minotaur, who is this half beast, bullheaded child, and it becomes very uncontrollable and eventually has to be kept in this big, vast labyrinth that exists beneath the palace. And so it's
Yep.
like the subconscious kind of the royal story. And, there's this whole story about, the hero coming in and whatever, slaying the Minotaur, liberating
Mhm.
people from this scary thing. But all of that to say, the Minotaur is, I think, a very good emblem of like the monster within, or our shadow,
Yes.
or what we're keeping in shadow, because he
Yep.
lives in this dark, dingy realm, and he just like eats teenagers, and he's, gross and
Eats
reviled.
teenagers.
He eats 14 Athenian youths per year, who are like
Oh, wow.
selected by a lottery, and they have to go into the labyrinth, and it's just a horrible fate, right? So if you want to think about fate, we just
We just had our
released
Wheel of Fortune episode.
a Wheel of Fortune episode of Fate and Fortune. Anyway, the Minotaur to me is so much about that sort of shadow that we keep in this like central, locked away, impossible to discover point. But when we do wind up encountering it, it overwhelms us and it can consume
Oh,
us too. So I think that shadow work is something, again, it's like really popular, but I don't know why it's popular, because it's very hard and very,
it's very
very
hard.
depressing.
It's people love it because they're not doing it actually,
Mhm.
and so they're just using it to continue to boost their own precious idea of
Yeah.
who they are and
Well,
their perfect hero thing.
I think so much about like that exact idea, and Theseus, who is the hero who comes in and
Yeah.
slays the Minotaur. I don't think that we're supposed to slay the Minotaur. I think we're supposed to do something else. I don't know what it is. I don't think we're supposed to be friends with it, but I think that it's the hero, like the solar hero, has this hubris that he can just slay and defeat and vanquish with his like sword and his
Yeah.
solar power. And I don't think that that's what we're supposed to do.
In Jung's Red Book, he has an entire like interaction with the devil, and he basically says like basically tells people, hey, if you ever get the chance to meet your devil, you better take it seriously and make friends with him, because he probably has all the answers to the thing, like to the questions that you're looking to answer. He's
Mm.
probably the one in possession of it. I think that bringing up the Minotaur myth is so good, because there is this like archetypal crisis we all have going on within our psyches of, are we the hero or are we the villain? When we have like that inflation deflation thing that goes on, which is very classic, I think, for a lot of people, where at one moment we're like, yo, I am the ish, like I have
Mhm.
everything, I'm so great. And then in the next moment, it's like, how could anyone possibly love me? Right? I'm so garbage. That is this a very clear indication that we're oscillating between this like ego stance and this shadow stance of like, I am the hero who's supposed to be beloved and to conquer all of the darkness in the world in myself, and then we're also the one who is the darkness and who is terrible and unlovable and should be cast into shadow. And so we have this back and forth. Um, if we're really going to take a Jungian stance on it for a second, this is a little controversial to people, but to Jung, and to many in the spiritual community for sure, there is no real concept of evil. Evil doesn't exist as
Mm.
an external idea. Evil is all that you refuse to acknowledge about yourself,
Mhm.
because there is such a thing as people being abusive and horrible and vile and all this stuff. Not all of us have a huge capacity for that kind of thing. Some of us do. All of us have a small capacity for it. And the more that we push away that stuff that lives in all of us, the more we refuse to see it within ourselves, the more it gets projected outwards.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
Jung said, like, very, I don't know the exact quote of it, but he said very classically, when someone asked him what he is afraid of for the future, he didn't say World War III, he didn't say global warming. He said that people will not see the shadow within themselves.
Mm.
That is my
Mhm.
biggest fear for the coming world, because according to Jung, that is how we got Hitler. That
Mm.
is how we have like all of the major disasters that we've had in the world, is because people could not see their own racism, their own vileness, their own all of this stuff. And so when a figure like Hitler came in and said, I can hold all of this, I am the one with all of these qualities, people could say like, oh yeah, it's him, he's the one who
Yeah.
has it. And so they just projected it outward, and he became powerful, and he just held all of that power because it was all people's unintegrated shadows.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wild. Yeah. And so I think that, why is the shadow so frightening, and how do we make it less so? I think that
Yeah.
obviously, yeah, nobody wants to be responsible for pain or suffering. And if you
And
do,
yet we
like,
all are.
exactly. And so
Hmm.
I think that that's one of the ways, like, that's just something about growing up, something about becoming older and wiser, um, that is important to connect with. And I think that that's why also stories of deities that are of the underworld or connected to the shadow realm in some way are so powerful to learn
Yeah.
about and,
Yeah.
experiment with creatively, because that is to teach you something, right? We
Yeah,
have to kind
absolutely.
of have, yeah, like when we think of light and shadow, I think as an astrologer, of the sun and the moon, or day and night, and, the two kind of like whatever hemispheres of the chart, the
Right.
visible and the invisible. And so to kind of learn about the shadow and learn what that is, we do have to kind of think about what we project outwards, right? Like
Yes.
I have like a serious people pleasing thing. It's a really bad. I'll tell you all story. I got in a car accident
Oh,
a few weeks ago. It was not my fault. I was
it was
stopped
not your
at a
fault.
light. It was not my fault. This person rear-ended me ridiculously. So I was stopped at a light, and waiting, minding my own BI business, as my dad says.
Your
And
BI business.
I don't know what that is. He says it. So I was minding my business, and this girl just rammed into my car, and I was fine. But it was a shock, and it really hurt, and it was
Yeah.
bizarre. And I get out of the car, and the first thing out of my mouth is, "Are you okay?" And I'm asking her if she's okay. And then she's like this, like, she looked very young to me. And I felt so bad for her. And I was like,
Hmm.
why am I feeling bad for this person? Anyway, long story short, I wound up like hugging her and telling her everything is going to be okay. I was like, don't worry. The astrology is terrible today. It's going to be fine. Don't worry. And I was so nice. And then I walked away and I was like, what is wrong with me that
Hmm.
I needed to be that person in that moment instead of actually being irritated and being like, what were you doing? Like, I didn't get any info from her about what happened. I was just like, are you okay? So, and of course, she's not a demon. She was just being careless and everything is
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
But I really have been thinking a lot about what the hell that is in me that, expresses that. And that's, I think, something having to do with, again, I'm like telling on myself, but it's like, what am I locking away that's actually mad and frustrated and
Yep.
unexpressed? And then
Well,
where does that
whenever,
go? Yeah.
yeah,
Hmm.
whenever we talk about the shadow, we end up confessing something. It's it's inevitable. Um, every time I have like a class and someone brings a shadow question, I always at the end of the class, I'm like, what did I say? What
Yeah.
did I tell
Hmm.
everybody about my deep dark secrets that I probably shouldn't have? We
It's
always end up
alarming, and then it's, like,
start
recorded
confessing.
on Zoom
Yeah,
forever
and
for
it's there
people.
forever.
Yep, I know.
People know what
Just
I
like
said to
this.
that girl. Yeah, um yeah, it's exactly it. Like the way we interact with other people gives us a lot of information about our shadow, the most information, because
Mhm,
what happened with you and that girl was some kind of projection. You projected something onto her about like being helpless or young or fragile or whatever, and you locked away your own shadow experience. Like
mhm,
there's a resistance to your anger or to your ability to be domineering or whatever the thing was that should have been the
mhm,
response.
mhm,
I think that one of the ways, Jung's very famous quote is basically, you know, if you want to something like you want to know your shadow, look at like the person who annoys you the most, and there it
mhm,
is, right?
mhm,
It's very classic. It's like the
mhm.
person who gets under your skin the most is the
Right.
person who has some kind of quality that you really despise within yourself that you're denying, and it's usually the part of the shadow that's closest to the surface too, that you're most
Mm,
aggressively in denial about because you can almost see it. And so that is so irritating. I think that the reason we cannot deal with shadow, as we kind of hinted at already, is because in order to have the ego develop, it has to believe itself to be good.
mhm,
Right. In
mhm,
order to develop who we are, we have to think we're good people. We have to think we're worthy of our lives and what we receive in our lives and continuing in our lives. There's a tremendous, as you said, a tremendous amount of shame and guilt around saying, I've hurt people. I've hurt them and I made choices that I could have made differently. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to do that. And we become very, very defensive about the choices we've made, which is fair. But I think that that is the mark of somebody who is really on the path of individuation and taking it seriously and doing real shadow work. When you can say, I've hurt somebody, I've been the villain in someone's story, and I didn't mean to, I didn't want to, and I accept that I did. I
Mm-hmm.
accept that
Yeah.
that was mine. And I am hurting myself because I did it and because I didn't see that shadow part of myself earlier. And so it caused
Mm-hmm.
someone else pain. But the fact that you can just admit that you did, that is
Yeah.
enormous. That is
Yeah.
much bigger than a lot of us. The mark of individuation and maturity is when we can say, I am that, and I am also this other thing. I am both
Mm-hmm.
things at the same time. We're not always ready for that. We're not always ready for that. And we're gonna, and it's cyclical, just like everything else, right? We get into
Mm-hmm.
stages where we can see it and stages where something is hidden, right?
Yeah. Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that yeah, that's also so smart and so well said. And I do think that because, again, of the popularity of so called shadow work on the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual internet, people really do feel like they should dive in, like that's going to solve all of their problems and it's going to be the key to unlocking happiness. And what it actually does, I think, at first is it shows us things that are really scary
Yep.
and really hard to digest. And it can actually feel like a setback and it can feel like a kind of a letdown even.
Mm-hmm.
We're supposed to be healing, but actually it feels so bad. And
Yeah.
so I think that happens when we start analysis,
Yeah.
obviously, and then contending with shadow as an energy. It can make us feel very, the word that I think of is leaden, right? And so
Yeah.
that kind of makes me think about Saturn, the
Yeah.
planet, in the chart. And so I was thinking about, like, what would be the shadow area in astrology? What would point to shadow? And I don't have a good answer. I don't think that there is one, but I think that Saturn comes up for me because Saturn is the planet of I would say, like, the restricted
Yeah.
sense of growth. And to put it in self-help parlance, Saturn is like the inner critic, and
Mm-hmm.
the thing that tells us that we're failures and
Yeah.
we can't achieve. But if we learn to kind of investigate that voice and sit with it, right, we're not supposed to, like, banish the inner critic, but maybe use it as a useful signposting
Mm-hmm.
about where we are and what we can achieve, then we can actually build towards something greater, right? Saturn wants us to work to achieve a sense of self mastery, which is really, really hard and the work of a lifetime. He's also a very slow planet. He slows things down and makes them feel heavy. He's also associated with, like, death and darkness and being isolated and
Yeah.
rejected. So all of these right, we often reject the shadow. We try to kind of cut it off and bury it, or we try
Yep.
to put it in a box where that's not really, it's not possible to do that. Um, and
Yeah.
so I think that that's important too. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite Jung quotes is, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own shadows."
Yeah, it's
Well, or their
true.
own souls, basically. But he
It's
means
true
like his
though.
own, your own shadow, like, and that they will do anything to
we
avoid it.
all we all have stories of observing family members, friends, partners, of, like, doing the most to just escape sitting with the fact that
Mm-hmm.
there's just something really uncomfortable about their experience that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be acknowledged. And so that is when we do project that off into other people, or
Yep.
wind up, like, having cyclical failures or something like that that trigger us. And so
Mm-hmm.
when that gets really loud, we're definitely in the realm of the shadow.
Yeah, I had a client come to me a little while ago, and it was so interesting because she had a friend who just bothered her. She was just so bothered by the choices this friend was making and wanted to explore that. She's like, "Why am I so bothered?" And of course, my brain is immediately tingling, like, shadow, shadow. And I'm, like, very curious about it. And we just pulled some enormously powerful cards. Like, one of the cards we pulled was the Fool. And this friend had kind of gone off and had an adventurous sort of life. And my client hadn't. She had kind of stayed where she was and taken care of a lot of people. And this Fool came up to kind of be like, there was something in that she saw in the friend that she could not find within herself, which was so layered under shadow. And I think that is another thing that we want to bring in, is that the shadow isn't always evil, bad, terrible things. Sometimes the shadow, as you were saying in that story of like, where's your power in confronting this person who hit you with her car? Sometimes the shadow is the beautiful stuff in us that we have repressed for whatever reason, because it's uncomfortable, because we didn't have models for it. I've been working a lot with my analyst on basically the Empress archetype, because anytime I look at it, I just pull an emotional blank. I'm like, I don't know. I get it. I get it intellectually. I get it in a feministic way. I get it, but do I feel that? Very difficult. And so then whenever I'm like, in a situation where I'm like, no one takes care of me, my analyst is like, and where is that in you? And I'm like, I don't freaking know. I don't know. It doesn't exist. And of course it does somewhere. It's just really buried under the surface. And we're not going to get into it today because we couldn't possibly, but just hinting for everybody that sometimes our shadow is exactly what we've inherited from our parents, that they have not integrated themselves. And there's layers of shadow and complexities of shadow. A lot of times the shadow is what we've inherited culturally from just the world. We all know that racism is very, very, very real and very loud in this world. And we all are like, well, but not really me. It's like, well, no, really all of us actually, because we all hold that collective shadow. And if we can heal that little bit of it in ourselves, then we can heal the collective. That this is how we are in a patriarchy to begin with, is because, the feminine was repressed into shadow. We've said that a lot on this podcast. And it's because that's exactly where it went. It was like, no, we don't know what to do with this. It gets pushed away. It gets put somewhere that we don't have to look at it. It's the Minotaur in the dungeon kind of a thing. And that's how it gets scary too. One of the things I would say about the shadow is that it's often not as scary as it seems it is, and it becomes scary because it's hidden. It's like, when you're watching a horror movie and they do the fake jump scare thing. Well, you don't know, but for
I
other
don't
people,
know.
I like to tease you about it. For other people, they have like fake jump scare thing where they're like, the closet door is open. What is
Aren't
in
you
it?
stressed enough in life? Why do you have to watch it?
Well,
Why do you have to see it?
Because then you feel better about your own life, because you're not worried about ghosts.
No.
You're worried
Then
about
I
your
see
taxes.
ghosts in my house, and then the closet door moves, and I'm like, great, this is real. So no.
Yeah. Well, I guess if in some cases that might make it worse, but I don't. I'm fine. I like it. It makes me de-stress. I'm like, okay, well, that wasn't real. Thank God. My life is better now. But no, like they'll be like, oh, there's something moving in the closet. And you're like, oh my God, it's going to be so bad. It's going to be a monster. It's going to be so bad. And like a puppy jumps out. And you're like, oh, that was
but then
fine.
something else scary happens, and then you're really scared.
Well, yes, something scary will happen. But sometimes we make up this idea of what we're afraid of, and we don't actually know what's behind the closet door. And a lot of times, like in the anecdote that I gave about me and this person in the past, and how I treated them in a way that I didn't see, that it was cruel or bad or mean or uncaring. When I looked at it later and I integrated it and I was able to accept it, and it didn't make me freak out anymore, I still feel shame and remorse about it, absolutely, but I can acknowledge it. Like I'm like, well, I mean, I wasn't the worst person in the world. I was kind of mean. Like I was mean. That wasn't cool, and that was really bad. And I don't treat people like that anymore, certainly. But because I learned from that, but I wasn't a villain, terrible person who's unlovable now, because I acted in that way at this period in my life. And I think that that's important to remember, is that I think we're all worthy of redemption. Sometimes we don't believe we are, and we all are, but we have to very honestly see it and acknowledge it and accept it and own it. And whenever I talk about shadow work, I talk about it in stages. And so I just kind of want to give you an overview of what that sort of looks like. Whenever, like, people have asked me, like, well, how would Jung say to do shadow work? And I'd be like, he wouldn't. He would not recommend it. He would say, don't do it unless you're in analysis, you're in with a therapist, you have a container in which this is safely done. Because to start thinking, oh my God, I've treated this person really bad, I'm the villain, then leads to, I'm not the person I thought I was. Who could ever want me? Who could ever love me? I am so lost to shame. And then we break apart and we don't have that like stability of the container to be like, we're working through something. Hold on, don't freak out, right? So that's the first thing. If you really feel like this is a calling for you, make sure you have someone to hold that for you and hold it still. First thing we want to do is just ask questions. Just ask questions about our behavior. Just notice the behavior. Notice when it makes you feel bad, when you feel super defensive, when you feel super in denial. Then after you can notice a little bit, maybe you can acknowledge, okay, well, you know what I'm starting to see? I'm starting to see a little bit of a pattern here. I'm anxious and therefore I am acting in this way. Or, I'm pretending that I always start a sentence by saying, I'm not trying to gossip, but I love gossiping. That is fully not in my shadow anymore. I love gossiping. And we can start to just name it a little bit, just name it gently. If we can name it, then maybe we can start to acknowledge it a little bit more fully. And as we do that work of acknowledgement, slowly over time, over months, even years, then we can question, what would it look like for me to take responsibility for this? It's very slow. Go slow. When you start to feel that thing of like, I'm not comfortable doing this, just stop it. It does not make you a bad person. Just pull it way back, because we don't want to start to hate ourselves. The idea is not to hate ourselves. The idea is to heal, to integrate more appropriately ourselves. And that is my spiel about how to go about that process. Though I highly recommend being in a container if you're going to do it. I mean, we're going to talk about it in my course about how to do that gently with the tarot, gently. And I think the tarot is the perfect tool to do that with, whether you pull the devil card or not. Anytime we get a reversal, anytime we get a card like, the Nine of Swords is one of these like classic shadow cards of like, yes, you're really overthinking things, aren't you? How is that working out for you? Like, you really think that you can just control everything, and you can't. And so you're just completely broken down and panicked about it. Like there's cards that show us these patterns that are collective experiences of shadow that we all have. And so it's a great tool to work with it safely, and slowly, but safe and slow is really, really, really key when you're doing this work.
Yep. Very true. And I think that even reflects the kind of positive side of Saturn work.
Yeah.
Right? Because Saturn is such a slow, time-oriented planet. And when we work with intention, with Saturn energy, if we take things one thought or one day at a time, it's kind of a cliche, but if we do something for ourselves diligently and with intention, that is when Saturn kind of gives us that so-called reward that we're looking for, which could be some kind of external success, or in this case, it could be that inner knowing that is like, closer to an idea of integration than anything else.
Yeah.
And, I think that that's maybe one of the final threads here, is that people often talk about integrating shadow. And I don't know what you think, explicitly about this, but in my experience so far, I don't know if it's really an integration or if it's just a kind of clearing space for a shadow. Like integration to me feels like the light is subsuming the dark, and they're kind of like finding a happy medium in between, or they're averaging out.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think like with the example of how I would be in relationship with this friend, like, no, I don't want to integrate being a mean person. And like half the time I'm a mean person, and that's fine with me. Obviously it's not. And I'm not a mean person, guys.
This is just, I just want to say, this is what you
me.
get. This is what you get for being friends with someone else besides me. So
I had a difficult mother. Okay.
It's just so sad, because I was like an hour north of you, also being a sad emo kid in 2008.
Yeah, I know.
So
we could have
just a train ride away.
No, I mean, like, it's like I we don't want to integrate it to say like, oh, now we just make it okay. Sometimes there's some things I don't think we need to, like I can accept certain things about myself that I know I'm not going to change and they're just part of my darkness. That's fine. Like the fact that I like to gossip. I'm okay with that. I'm not, I don't need to, I don't need to change that about myself. I mean, not right now, at least I don't feel that bad about it. I keep
You
it
shouldn't.
tight. I keep it tight. Um, and it's fine, but like there's certain things that of course we want to change. So when we think about integration, I think that a better way of thinking about it is we're integrating in order to kind of see with more clarity and choose with more consciousness. Choose our
Mm,
behavior and our actions with more consciousness. I don't think that
mhm.
the shadow parts of ourselves are ever going to go away. I certainly can see the impulses in me when I'm anxious to be sharp and critical again. Like it's there. It's never not going to be there. That is part of my, and this is a whole other thing, but like the shadow comes from my experiences,
Yeah.
developed from my experiences growing up and being a person and feeling insecure and all these things. So I know that it's in response to a wound in me. And so it's never going to go away, but I know that I can notice it when it's there and say, that's not really how I want to behave right now. I don't really want to react in that way. I think that when we can bring in the shadow, what it offers us is peace.
Mm,
It's just
mhm.
we feel more at peace with ourselves and our
Yeah.
choices and our behavior.
Yeah.
And then we can live without, dreams of being stalked and horrible things and being scared all the time. I think that it's something that can be quite beautiful to, we all want to practice compassion and yet we have no reservoir of compassion for ourselves.
Mhm.
And to look at our own shadow and still choose compassion for ourselves and to see it completely, that is grace. I
Mhm.
mean, I think that
Yeah.
that's what that is. So,
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, just like the Minotaur baby, you know, like being rejected and kept
Yes.
in the dark, that made it into this fierce monster that needed to eat people and to be this devouring
Well,
monster,
but
right?
there it
And
is.
so,
It's a
yeah.
great metaphor because the more that
Mhm.
the baby, the wounded part, is not seen for what it is, the more that it
Yeah,
devours what it is not.
totally.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you want to be a good person, look at how you're a bad person, people.
This podcast brought to you by a Scorpio and a Virgo with a lot of Scorpio placements. It's great.
um, we did good. I think that the
Mhm.
shadow is a difficult topic. I kind of came at it a little bit flippantly today because I'm still tired and moving, but also
Mhm.
because I am just overwhelmed with the topic. And I think take my class if you want to
Mhm.
go into it deeper with me because we're going to go into it. But also, I think maybe this is a topic we'll return to certainly in other iterations.
Yeah,
We'll
for
keep
sure. This is
discussing the
like a part
shadow.
one, I
Part
feel,
one.
right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely. Symbol time.
Yes, let's talk about a symbol.
If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to leave a review or learn more about how you can support us on Patreon, where you can get access to some exciting exclusive offerings. Or you can connect with us by sharing a symbolic experience, whether from a dream or synchronicity, for us to explore on the show. Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience or connect with us on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people interested in all things esoteric? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an ad partner. We offer a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, and we would be delighted to showcase your business and offerings to new hearts and new minds. Simply fill out an advertiser application form at our website, linked in the show notes below, or navigate to sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us.
Shadow work has become one of the most popular methods of self betterment over the last decade, but what that work really is and the power it actually holds for our lives is deeply misunderstood. In my new workshop, Shadow Work and the Tarot, a guided workshop of self reckoning with the cards, we will explore exactly how to do real and effective shadow work with the tarot. Tarot is one of the best tools we have for meaningful shadow work, and if we use it the right way, it can guide us to true recognition, integration, and transformation. Join this 3-part workshop hosted by the Jung Academy and myself starting January 2024. And there's still a little bit of time left to grab early bird pricing, so do not wait. Go to jungacademy.com/tarot-and-shadow or go to the link in the show notes or on my bio in Instagram to get your ticket now. So, our symbol today is not planned for this episode, but perfect for it, I'm realizing.
Mm-hmm.
So, our writer writes, "Hi, Christina and Mariana. I'm a first-generation Greek who comes from a traditional and conservative family, so my exploration into the occult has been fairly recent. Last year, I began having Reiki energy healings, and in one of the first sessions, I vividly saw a black dragon towards the end of the session. Since then, I've noticed dragons regularly, and a few months ago, through a solo meditation, I saw that St. George is one of my guides. I was surprised that such a historically prominent figure in Christianity actually had such a personal connection to me. Superficially, however, it made some sense because in the Greek tradition we celebrate name days or saints' feast days, and St. George is my namesake. Although he has an actual figure in antiquity, I know, or he was an actual figure in antiquity, I know that St. George also has a mythology surrounding him, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the meaning of the dragon as a symbol, as well as the St. George story." Great. And they also said that they love the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's very sweet. It said, "I like to think of myself as your distant Greek friend." We will take a distant Greek friend. Thank you very
Hello.
much. So, St. George and the Dragon is a myth that is St. George is a Christian saint. And the myth of St. George of the Dragon is essentially that there is a dragon who is attacking this town. It actually happens in the Middle East, right? Libya, you said it was, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so he's attacking this town, and the dragon ends up eating a princess. And so here comes George, and George slays the dragon and rescues the princess. That is the very, very short form of the story for people who haven't heard of it before. There are a lot of things to explore about St. George and the Dragon. In the context of this episode, the dragon is very shadowy. So we know that there is an aspect to it of conquering the shadow and conquering the scary, dark thing that has the princess. The princess, if we're thinking about that mythologically, is often symbolic of the soul, the experience of soul in its gentle feeling center. In a Jungian context, we would certainly see the princess as the anima figure, who's also that kind of soul, feminine, soft, not always soft, but feminine figure, who allows us to feel more deeply and allows us to connect with the feminine experience. So there's those layers to it. Other layers that I've heard of, which I find really fascinating, is that the dragon is that St. George is fighting against the feminine in its polarized nature. So it has been halved into its wicked nature and its docile nature, into the dragon as the feminine and like as the terrible mother kind of devourer archetype, and the princess as the gentle, docile, perfected, purified feminine archetype. And so George kind of allegorically, he sort of shows us this like killing away of the embodied, powerful, dark feminine side that is now seen as corrupt, and the like idealization of the purified, perfected feminine side that has no real agency or power. That's another breakdown of that story that I've encountered, which I find very interesting. So those are my initial ideas. What kind of comes to you about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those stories that we see so often in myth and legend where a hero has to slay a dragon, right? So we have like Marduk and Tiamat in the Babylonian tradition. We have Apollo and Typhon, and also, or is it Apollo and Python, and then Zeus and Typhon? all
I
of
think
these
it's
are
Zeus and
Typhon.
Typhon.
Okay.
I think so, but I'm
Okay.
not sure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is all mushed in my brain, but it's a
They
trope.
all sound the same.
It's a trope, and so what is striking to me is that this is a recurring like form in
An
the
image,
collective
yeah.
unconscious that has been recycled throughout generations of, and it's saying something to us, right? And so what you were talking about with the feminine, with the princess being a kind of expression of like, the docile feminine and then the devouring mother as the dragon, it also reminds me of the myth of Psyche and Eros, where
Hmm.
it's a different story, but there's a moment that's very similar where Psyche is, there's like a prophecy that Psyche, this beautiful daughter of a king and queen, she's like so beautiful that all the people stop worshiping Aphrodite and start worshiping her. Her parents go to an oracle and they say, "What can we do?" And they say, "Your daughter is to be wed to a horrible dragon and be devoured by it. Dress her for a wedding that's also her funeral and leave her on a cliff to be found by the dragon." And so she
Yeah.
goes, and it's this tragic thing. But then, of course, the dragon doesn't appear. She's carried away by the wind, and she has this love affair with Eros, who is like life, right? The kind of power of life unto itself. So it has this caveat that's different than the St. George story. But I think that what is consistent is the gentle, kind of like pure feminine, and then the the monstrousness of either things that are kept in shadow or contending with the gods or contending with some
Yeah.
kind of, hidden secret monster within. Again, we kind of come back to this. So I also tend to see in these stories, it's always like a male figure conquering the dragon, which
Yeah.
I tend to equate with the snake, which is a symbol of the feminine and
Yeah.
death and rebirth, and the snake eating its own tail, and all of these kind of, cyclic themes that are really super divine feminine oriented. So I wonder
Hmm.
what's your take on the kind of, the masculine feminine end of this?
Yeah, it feels to me like the idea of the solar hero conquering the essence of nature itself that
Mm-hmm.
makes it that renders the solar hero inconsequential
Mm-hmm. Mm.
because life and
Yeah.
death cycle around, and so it's like this fantasy almost of the conquering of the cycles of life that are more powerful than the consciousness itself.
Mm-hmm.
um, that's an idea. I think
Mm.
something also that came to me around this is the first experience you have with the dragon was of a black dragon, which reminded me
Mm-hmm.
immediately of the alchemical Negredo,
Mm.
because there's imagery that we have of the black dragon being a symbol of the Negredo, and the Negredo is basically the point in the alchemical work of the blackening. So it is basically the decay of the substance in the alembic, and it is the work of breaking it down, killing it. So it is that stage in which we are breaking down our sense of self, right? We're breaking,
Mm-hmm.
this is the shadow that we're
Yeah,
breaking down,
totally.
essentially the
Mm-hmm.
shadow work phase, where we're really taking what we was once whole and we once thought was fine, and disintegrating it into its most crumbled, blackened, decayed parts, so that we can then go through the next stage, which is the distillation, the purification of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting to me too, that that's a layer of this here.
Yeah.
um, but in St. George and the dragon, that's not necessarily what it's directly pointing to, but I think that those are, it's an added step that we can add to understanding its meaning for you.
Yeah. And so if our, listener is like doing Reiki and kind of doing this self work and healing, that black dragon revealing itself to you as a symbol is kind of saying, this is maybe where you are right now. This is the
Hmm.
stage of existence. And I think that taking a positive orientation to St. George and the dragon as he is this person's namesake, right? We're not going to
Hmm.
say he's the solar hero. And, I think we tend to be like, boo, solar hero. Like I don't know. I feel like I'm
We're
pro.
feminists here.
Exactly. But I don't want to do that because there's something inherent in the naming. There's a
Yeah.
synchronistic
Well, we are the solar hero.
correspondence. Yeah,
We too are the
exactly.
solar hero, and the idea
Mhm.
is not the idea is to correct the myth, not
Mhm.
eliminate it, right? So w- the slaying of the dragon, as you were saying before with the minotaur, we don't want to kill the minotaur. Like we want to go and see it for its ugliness, right? Like we want to look at the thing that we're afraid to look at, and then we want it to be transformed. So I think that we want to I like the idea personally that the dragon and the princess are one and the same, that they're two sides
Mhm.
of a single entity. And so I would correct the story if I could, to go in and, instead of slaying the dragon and saving the princess, bringing the dragon and the princess into the same space, and having that kind of conjunctio that Jung would call it,
Yeah.
that conjoining of them, bringing them back into a whole. That would be the work that I would say might be there for you
Mhm.
around this St. George and the Dragon, and maybe you as George is the facilitator of that wedding
Oh,
of shadow and light.
that's so smart. You're so good. That's so great. I don't have anything to add. I love that. That's great.
Well,
Yeah.
we did it. So good luck with that. And continue to notice your dragons. We will have a dragon episode, and we will definitely
Mhm.
talk about St. George. I'm very excited for dragon episode, but I want to get my ducks in a row and know what I'm going to say first,
Mhm.
because I want to get the good dragon stories. This is a really good one. But we can't just have boring dragon stories. So I need to do my research first, and then we'll do that. We'll also have a unicorn episode, and all my medieval fantasies will come true.
Mhm.
We've
Mhm.
already done the princess episode / maiden
Mhm.
episode, so go listen to that
Mhm.
if you haven't already.
Yeah, that might be
Um,
helpful actually.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah. So if you're interested in the the tarot, everything's just Jung. Can you tell I like Jung? The tarot and shadow class that is on the Jung Academy website. You can also find it on my Instagram page. Just a link to it. And yeah, those are all my notes for the day.
Wonderful. Yep, I got nothing. I'm just here living, being your friend, and hugging people after they crash into my car. So thanks everyone for listening.
See
We'll
you
see you next
soon.
time. Bye.
Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining our Patreon.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Christina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.